Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we'll be showing from round 9 of this year's FIDE Grand Swiss. It is an encounter I've been looking forward to as soon as I saw that they will play each other. Nikolas Theodorou versus Richárd Rapport. Nikolas still undefeated in the tournament, which is absolutely incredible considering his last 4 opponents were Jan Nepomniachtchi, world champion Gukesh, Yuyangi, and of course Vincent Keimer. And he drew 3 and defeated Gukesh, so absolutely incredible by Nikolas. Richárd did lose that game to Parham, but he does have an extra win. So points-wise, they are leveled. And the game is, well, what you would expect in a game played between Nikolas Theodorou and Richárd Rapport. So let's check it out. Nikolas with white opens with pawn to d4. We have pawn to e6. Richárd avoids, I guess, the London, but also you never know what Nikolas will go for. Pawn to c4, we have knight to c6 and knight to f3. We have knight to f6 and pawn to a3, going for some sort of a weird Indian game. Pawn to g6 and knight to c3. We have bishop g7 and pawn to e4. Nikolas grabs the full center here, and pawn to d6, just going for a nice flexible setup. We have bishop to e2, castles kingside, castles, and rook to e8. Now, we're still in known territory. This has all been played before. Bishop to e3, we have pawn to e5, d captures on e5, d captures, and now pawn to h3. There are some 10, maybe 12 games in the database where a queen trade happens right away, but here we have pawn to h3, and now there is a game where knight d7 is played. It was actually played in the Croatian Championship of 2004 between Mišo Cebalo and Nenad Šulova, but here in this game we have pawn to a5, and it is now, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. And okay, pawn to c5, grabbing more space, freeing up the c4 square for the light square bishop. We have a queen trade, queen captures rook f, captures on d1, and bishop to e6. We have bishop to b5, okay, nicely pinning the knight. Bishop to b3, chasing away the rook from d1, which means that you are now gaining control of the d file. So rook to d2 and rook e to b8. Also, you could go to d8, but that could be a problem. If you trade, okay, black does get the control of the d file, but then this capture will be somewhat annoying. The e5 pawn hangs, then the c6 pawn is weak, and it's not the best. White will be just better here. So after rook to d2, we have rook e to b8, and now rook to c1. We have rook back to d8, offering a rook trade, and pawn to g4. Okay, so just slowly maneuvering, not much happening. h6, king g2. We have a rook trade, rook captures, sorry, not bishop captures, knight captured on d2, and bishop all the way back to e6. We have bishop to c4, offering a trade of bishops, and rook to d8. We have bishop captures on e6, f captures on e6. Rapport not worried about doubling his pawns, as he does gain a lot of central control here. And now knight to c4. Also, the engine likes knight b5 here, just putting pressure on that c7 pawn, then going rook c4, pawn to b4. But you know, the engine always likes anything connected to pawn to b4, so that does not surprise me. For a human, it's very hard to actually decide to go for this knight to b5 move. But here, after f captures on e6, we have knight to c4 first from Nikolas. Pawn to g5, stopping any pawn to g5 action from Nikolas, and now rook to c2. We have bishop to f8, and now bishop to d2. Sorry, not bishop to d2, rook to d2, offering a trade of rooks. We have rook to a8, Richárd declines, and pawn to f3. We have pawn to a4, cementing that pawn on b2, and now knight to b5, going for the plan that the engine suggested a couple of moves ago. Rook to c8 defending, and now knight back to c3. We have rook to a8, again defending the a4 pawn, and we have a repetition. Knight to b5, rook to c8, and now pawn to h4. Nikolas declines the repetition. He wants to play on. He wants to win the game. Okay, g captures, and now knight back to c3, saying that if you defend the pawn now with rook to a8, then your rook will remain there, and I'm going to shift my rook over to the h file. And Richárd says that is a very nice plan. I will not allow that. He plays knight to h7, and now Nikolas grabs the pawn on a4. Now b4 is coming. That's for certain. We have bishop to e7, pawn to b4 and bishop to g5. So here you can also see how white's entire plan revolves around executing pawn to b4. And that is why Nikolas is doing so well in the tournament. He understands such things. We have bishop captures on g5, and now again h captures looks natural. You undouble your pawns and you have this pawn defended forever, but the knight here does look a little bit weird. So knight captures on g5, activity above all. That is the motto of many great players. We have knight back to c3, now preparing that pawn to b5, rook to f8, putting pressure on f3, and rook to f2 defending. We have pawn to h3 check, and king to g3, of course not allowing the capture of the f3 pawn. We have rook to d8, and now pawn to b5. We have knight to d4, knight captures on e5, and now what was Richárd's idea here, bringing his knight all the way to d4? It was knight d captures on f3, which looks odd as the f3 square is defended twice, but it works. And knight captures on f3 was played. But just in case you're wondering, can you give up the rook for two knights? Not really, because after captures and captures, there's this annoying rook d3, which attacks the c3 knight, and once you move the knight, then just pawn to h2, and the two knights cannot stop the pawn. You will have to capture with the king, and then rook captures on f3, so it's actually a rook against a knight, and the black would be completely winning here. So after this beautiful move by Richárd, we have knight captures on f3, and now rook to d3. And if you look at the position now, Richárd is just down a full piece, but it doesn't matter. The h2 pawn is just that much strong. And here we have knight to d1, the only move that works. And here's a question, how to continue this. Now, you could go for knight captures on e4. This forks the king and the rook, which looks amazing. But the problem behind knight captures on e4 is that you have king f4. And now after knight captures on f2, you play knight captures on f2, you attack the rook and the pawn. And once you capture on a3, you also lose this pawn. And now the two knights versus a rook, that's definitely compensation enough. Or on the other hand, after knight to d1, you could execute pawn to h2 right away, and then you get something like rook captures on h2, rook captures on f3 check, king g2, and now king g7. You just start improving because, let's say a4, you can always play rook to a3. It's not really an issue, and it's not easy for white to make moves. So this would perhaps be the best move order for Rapport to go for. But instead, as we've shown that knight captures on e4 runs into king f4, Richárd cuts off the king. He plays pawn to e5, now stopping king to f4, and now there's only one move that keeps you in the game, and it's not an easy one to find. What would you play here as white in order not to lose the game? That is the question. So move 40 has been played. Time control has been reached. You have time, and you have to use it well. Rook to a2. It's the only move that doesn't lose. And to give you a quick example, let's say you play pawn to a4, which also makes a lot of sense. You want to create a passed pawn. Then knight captures on e4, and this is now a problem. King does not have the f4 square. You have to move. Then knight captures on f2 with check, and after knight captures, you lose the knight with check. King g2, rook a3, and now, again, this is completely winning for black. So after e5, we have rook to a2, very nicely played by Nikolas. Rook captures on f3 check. We have king to h2, and now knight captures on e4. We have pawn to a4, and now pawn to b6. You could also play knight captures on c5, but then a5 and a6, and then the knight will have to sacrifice itself for the pawn, and it's a pretty quick draw. So here, Rapport shows that he is also now playing for the win. He plays pawn to b6. We have c captures, and pawn to a5, creating a passed pawn. And now you could, let's say, capture, and if pawn to b6, you go knight f6, and if b7, you can even give a check. You give a check, king g1, and now something like rook f8, you stop the pawn. So this is definitely an option. But Rapport says, no, I don't care about your a5 pawn. He goes knight f6. He goes after the g4 pawn right away. We have a6, knight captures on g4 check. We have king to g1, h2 with check. We have king to g2. Of course, you cannot go to h1. If you go to h1, rook to f1, and you just get checkmated. King to g2, h1 queen, and so on. It's checkmated in a couple of moves. So, of course, you have to go to g2, and now we have rook to g3 check, sacrificing the rook in order to queen the pawn. Not much to be done here. King captures, and now h1 queen. And it seems like, Nikolas can just resign the game. But pawn to a7. How is Richárd dealing with this pawn reaching the queening square? Well, you do have a couple of checks, but after, let's say, one check, king h4, any next check, and you're going to lose the knight on g4. So the knight is lost however you want to play this. So you have to stop the pawn. He has to block. Queen to a8, and now just king captures on g4. So Rapport gives up the knight in order to continue the game. And now he just plays king f7. He's bringing the king in to help out with the attack. We have knight to c3, king to e6, and now knight to a4. This is a beautiful maneuver, as you can stop defending the a7 pawn for one move, as if the queen captures, then you have knight c5 check and you pick up the queen. I know you see it, but, just, on and off chance you're having a bad day, that's why I show it. So here, pawn to h5 check, trying to catch him off guard, but Nikolas calculates well. Of course, if king captures, then just queen f3 check, and now whatever you play, king h4, the king just goes in, and it's going to be checkmate. There's no way to defend. So after h5 check, Nikolas just goes back, king g3, and now king to f5. And this is a beautiful move, and a very sneaky one, because it seems like you're just marching your king closer to the white king, when in fact you're creating a mating web, or worse. And it's not easy to make a move here. So what would you play here? Only one move doesn't lose the game for Nikolas. What would you play? The only move that doesn't lose is knight to c3. And of course, you're not going to give up the a7 pawn, but even if you defend with knight b2, then there's queen g8 check. And then you lose the rook on a2, and then the queen from a2 defends the queening square. So by playing king f5, this wild move, Richárd actually cleared this diagonal for the queen to fork the king and the rook. But okay, knight c3, best move, and only move. We have pawn to e4, king to f2, and now pawn to h4. The king and queen are escorting the two pass pawns down the board. Rook a4 attacking the pawn, and now there's no way for the pawn to be defended. Knight captures on e4 is coming next. So Richárd gives it up with check. We have king captures, and now pawn to h3. And the question is, how do you defend the a7 pawn while also stopping the h pawn? It doesn't seem like it's possible, but sometimes in chess it doesn't need to be possible. Just rook h4, you give up the a7 pawn, and that is exactly what Nikolas plays. We have queen captures on a7, rook captures on h3, and he was in this position on move 60 that Richárd Rapport and Nikolas Theodorou agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here. The knight defends the pawn, the king will easily defend the knight, and you have the rook to kick away the black king. So if anything, black has more chances to mess this up than white, and the draw is a fair conclusion to this great battle. So yeah, brilliant stuff. Nikolas still undefeated after facing his last five opponents were over 2,700, including the world champion. So yeah, like I said, he's definitely going to 2,700 and beyond, and he definitely belongs out there with the elite. Playing incredible chess. We'll see what happens. Still 2 more rounds to go. It's hard to say whether there are still chances of qualifying for the candidates. Probably not, but we will check out the final standings, not the final, but the standings after round 9, after all of the games have been played, and then we're going to discuss it in the next video. So yeah, big congratulations to both of them on this fine game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Austin Wheeler, Ali Urukoglu, Joseph McCardle, John Variet, and Duncan Weinkohl for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.